Hello, this is the interview on France 24. I'm Catherine Nicholson. Today speaking to Vladimir Chizhov, Russia's permanent representative to the European Union. This as tensions continue around Russian military presence in the vicinity of Ukraine. Mr. Chizhov, thank you for being our guest today. I'd like to start by talking about some of the latest military moves by Russia around Ukraine. 6 Russian warships sent through the Bosporus into the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. What's the purpose of this deployment?
Well, I understand this is natural activities of the Russian Navy. Actually, the Russian Navy is starting, I understand, tomorrow or the day after, it's starting major global exercises in all the oceans, all the fleets of the Russian Navy, from the Northern Fleet in the Arctic Ocean to the Pacific, and of course including the Black Sea Fleet and the Baltic Sea Fleet. They will be engaged in major exercises. So this has nothing to do with Ukraine.
Well, Ukraine says that Russia is blocking its access to the sea with this movement of ships. Do you accept that assessment?
Well, actually, the only country that is able to block access to the Black Sea is Turkey through the Bosporus. But this doesn't seem to be the case.
There's also, as you know well, Russian military personnel and hardware stationed in very large numbers on Russian soil, close to the border with Ukraine. We have heard repeated denials from Russia that there is any plan to invade Ukraine. So in that case, what are these tanks, artillery and troops doing there in such large numbers?
Well, I don't know which numbers you have in mind. I don't have any. I haven't counted any
An
of those
estimate
groups.
of around 130,000 troops, for example. That's much larger than the normal amounts of troops that Russia might use in exercises.
That's also different from all the figures that have appeared in Western media and from official Western sources in the last month or two, which ranged between 70 and 140. So now you refer to 130.
Well, as I said, it's an estimate. But would you agree that's a large number, Mr. Chizhov? Would you agree that's a large number, a larger number than is usually the case, and raising suspicions?
I don't know what is the real number.
Okay. But what are they doing there? Regardless of the number, what are they doing there?
Well, actually, they are doing what armed forces of any country are expected to be doing in their own national territory. Exercising, normally, learning to operate their weaponry and the rest. But nothing that could be considered as threatening either Ukraine or any other neighboring country.
Russia has been engaged in a lot of dialogue and diplomacy over these last few weeks. The French president, notably in Moscow on Monday. And I'm sure he expressed to Vladimir Putin that these troop numbers are a concern to France as an ally of Ukraine. Is that not a reason for Russia to listen to those concerns?
Of course, we listen to everything Western political leaders have to say. That includes the French president. We are fully engaged in diplomatic dialogue because any problem of today's world, any political problem, can only be resolved by diplomatic means through dialogue. That is something we strongly believe in.
OK, so Russia committed to dialogue and diplomacy. In that case, no intention by Russia to make any kind of move on Ukrainian territory.
Well, this has been stated a number of times by my president, by my foreign minister, and I can subscribe to that as well.
OK, we have also heard multiple times from Moscow that Russia feels it is being threatened by NATO and NATO member countries. Now, from the NATO point of view, it would be more the other way around, particularly with the large number of Russian troops being greater than the amount of NATO forces in this region. Does Russia really have a case that it is legitimately threatened in this situation?
What we're witnessing here in Europe is that NATO continues to increase its presence
Yeah.
in areas bordering Russian territory. In spite of what had been promised back in 1990 and onwards, and what has been all countries participating in the OAC signed up to in 1999.
But if I might just step in, Mr. Chizhov, if the grievance is with NATO and NATO member states, why take the step of stationing Russian troops on the border of a non-NATO state? Ukraine is a non-NATO state, and NATO has confirmed there are no moves in progress at this point for Ukraine to join.
So when you say that Russian troops should move away from the Ukrainian border, you mean they should get closer to the borders of NATO member states?
No, that's not what I said, Mr. Chizhov. I'm asking what's the logic, if the grievance of Russia is with NATO, of stationing this large number of troops by a non-NATO member state?
Because our grievances are not only with NATO, but NATO itself is fueling tensions in Russian-Ukrainian relations by supplying weaponry to Ukraine, by training Ukrainian forces how to deal with Russia. And by the way, the Ukrainian army, which is not a small army, I would say, in today's world, it numbers over 250,000 people. Mm-hmm. And more than half of those are deployed next to the Russian border. Mm-hmm. We cannot ignore that either. And with Ukraine describing Russia as an aggressor, as an enemy, mm-hmm. what else should we be doing?
Just recently, I interviewed the deputy head of NATO, Mircea Geoana, for France 24. I asked him about this idea that Ukraine might join NATO. I'd like to play you and our viewers his response to that question.
Now they try to tell us not to strengthen the eastern flank. NATO didn't have any military presence in the eastern flank before 2014, after the illegal annexation of Crimea. They want to have Ukraine in their sphere of influence. Was the result of the continuous war in the Donbass and the annexation of Crimea and the threat today against Ukraine. 10 years ago, only 20% of Ukrainian people wanted to join NATO and the EU. Today we have 60-something%. So in a way, we hope that Russia will realize that what they do, they get the opposite of their intentions.
Regardless of whether Ukraine joins NATO or not, and when. What we witness today is that Ukrainian territory is being already used by NATO to expand its assets, its military planning. And that is, of course, a source of concern to my country.
And in terms of President Macron's visit to Moscow, was that a fruitful visit for you? Is that something that you would like to repeat?
I think it was quite useful. With France not only being a major European power, a nuclear power, and also having the presidency of the European Council during these 6 months, and of course being a member of the Normandy format. So all this put together puts France and its president in a very important position to continue dialogue with Russia. And as I understand, President Macron from Moscow, he went to Kiev and promised to get in touch with President Putin again after his Ukraine visit. We'll be looking forward to hearing from him in the immediate future.
Many suggest a key element in reducing tensions now, diffusing them, would be seeing that the Minsk agreements are finally complied with. Does Russia want this? It does have the power, for example, to withdraw support from separatists in the east of the country, which would leave Ukraine with no excuse not to comply with the agreements on its side.
I couldn't agree more. The Minsk agreements being the only existing basis for for progress towards a political settlement in Donbas, they should be fully implemented.
And Russia is prepared to make efforts on its side to see that they're implemented. Would that include withdrawing support from the separatists, as I suggested?
No. First of all, Russia is not party to that conflict. And there is no single reference in the Minsk agreements on Russia. I can tell you that the most recent effort in the in the Normandy format took place only yesterday in Berlin with the political advisors of 4 countries, France, Germany, Russia, and Ukraine participating. But unfortunately, that was, again, it didn't lead to any progress because Ukraine still refuses to implement its obligations as per the Minsk agreements. Particularly, it refuses to have direct dialogue with the Donbas authorities, with the self-proclaimed republics of Donbas.
There was a leading official from the pro-Kremlin ruling party, Andrei Turchak, who recently said Russia could send certain weapons to separatists that it backs in the Donbas region. That sounds like an admission or a contradiction of what you've told me, that Moscow is not involved in Donbas. Why would he say that?
I didn't say Moscow was not involved. I said Moscow was not a party to the conflict. So
Russia could have some influence on this aspect of the Minsk agreements.
In the Normandy format, I think so far, since the format was launched, Russia did much more than its partners, including France and Germany, on persuading the parties to the conflict.
Before we run out of time, just to confirm with you, Russia committed to a diplomatic outcome. That is what Russia is seeking.
Yes, indeed.
OK, that's all we have time for. But thank you very much, Mr. Chizhov, for speaking to us on France 24. And that is it from us for now. Do stay tuned to France 24.
In 2020, 4 years after the referendum and the conclusion of bitter negotiations, Brexit went into effect. On the European stage, the United Kingdom had now gone solo. For its fiercest supporters, it was a triumph.
Against all the odds, the most unlikely victory of modern times.
Brexit is about self-government.
But problems loomed ahead. Over immigration, violence, and the fate of Northern Ireland.
That creates instability and it creates anger.
Brexit and the feeling that the outside community have of the British, they're not coming back.
Watch Brexit Year 1 in Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.